And before we get into the readers, I'm going to outline a couple of our programs that are coming up so that you are kept informed about everything that we're doing. Please look at LouisvilleLiteraryArts.org for more information on each of these things. Amy's going to put that in the chat. This month, we have workshops on building multidimensional bad guys, which sounds really fun, with Angela Mitchell, and writing emotion with Katie Yoakum. October 6th, we have a workshop on story endings with Ellen Burkett Morris. And October 8th, we have a really exciting collaboration on how to write a novel in 30 days with the Carnegie Center. This is a virtual NaNoWriMo workshop that I'm sure you won't want to miss if you're going to participate in writing a novel in November. I also want to mention that we're supporting the programming of Lipstick Wars with Lipstick University, which is a community workshop that sold out within hours of it being posted. So we're really excited for that collaboration and look forward to more of those in the future. Remember that Give for Good Louisville is on September 17th, and that's a day to donate and fundraise for all of your community nonprofits like LLA. If you like what we're doing and you want us to continue doing it and expand, be sure to share our post that day and donate. Even $10 donations really help us meet our goal, so please check that out and share. If you want to help us fundraise, go to the link that Amy's posting in the chat, hit the fundraise button. We'd love any help supporting LLA and getting the word out there through the pandemic and beyond. All right, so Amy's going to be posting links in the chat for each reader's work, and also, go ahead and ask your questions in the chat as they come up, and I will go through them later on in the Q&A. All right, let's get started. First up is Marta Miranda. Marta Miranda is a Latinx Afro-Caribbean queer woman who has spent her life working towards equity, inclusion, and creating systems change. She lives, loves, and works at the intersection of identities, ethnicity, race, gender, and sexualities, applying an intersectional feminist lens to all she does. Marta was inducted into the Appalachian Poets in 2009. She has performed her work at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, the Carnegie Center for Literacy, Eastern Kentucky University, the University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, University of New Mexico, Appalachian Women Rising, Holler Poets Series, 21C Hotels, the Kentucky Museum for Arts and Crafts, Louisville Metro City Hall, Women's March Ali Center, LGBTQ Center LA, Centerlink, Rochester, New York, and numerous conferences, marches, and rallies. Her bilingual memoir, Cradled by Skeletons, A Life in Poems and Essays, was published in 2020 by Shavelin House Modern Press and is available at local bookstores, including Carmichael's, as well as on Amazon. Marta is also the author of Lullaby for Maddie, a children's story currently at the publisher. Let's welcome Marta.
Thank you. Honored to be here. Since I failed retirement and I have not been reading, COVID kind of, I published my book, I did the book launch, and I started getting booked all over the country. And I hoped I was going to do readings and signings, and COVID came and nothing happened. So I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce you all to my baby girl. She's really pretty. And I'm very, very proud. So when I thought I was retired from running the Center for Women and Families, I did two things. I went and got a mermaid tattoo because that was my next job, mermaid author on the beach. And then I started to write my memoir, and I've done both. So I'm very honored to be here and to kind of showcase my work. Also, before being named the commissioner by the governor, mid-June, I started to do that work July 1st. I was writing an erotica series called Juicy. So that's in the closet now. I haven't been in the closet in a really long time, but I had to put the Juicy series in the closet because, you know, I'm in charge of big things again. And I thought I was retired and free and I could put my memoir there. So If any of the legislators get my memoir, I probably would be fired from my position. I have not lived a PG-13 life, and I'm really grateful about that. So I'm going to start. I'm going to start with a poem that is a new poem that I wrote on June 1st. I live in Louisville now, and I wrote on June 1st. And it was, we've had all the issues around Breonna Taylor and the police and all the incredible violence that we have witnessed. And then McAtee was shot and laid on the sidewalks for 12 hours. And I just was choking. This is the first movement that I've not been able to carry a sign or pound on a podium. And I didn't know what to do. I'm 66 and I am immune compromised, and I had to do something. So I wrote this poem, and I want to start as an honor to Louisville and the movement that is here. And it's called Morning, June 1st, Louisville, Kentucky. I awake with a brain chock full of infographics, woven by archetypal and historical metaphors tattooed on the soil of my heart. I challenge the existent violent paradigm because all that I am and breathe and love has been rejected, shamed, colonized, beaten, raped, murdered, or is illegal. I pound the podiums in public and weep in private. I remind us of the deep wounds on Black and brown bodies, the impotence of dominance, and the bodies hanging for hours from southern maple trees while good folks picnicked. The bodies now laying on sidewalks for hours. All warnings to not dare to challenge your own Holocaust or dare to seek your liberation without permission. Often, I tremble with rage, call my skeletons to attention, slip on my cloak of courage, and Kicks for Life speaks in tongues, handles copperheads, savors the alchemy of humanity, and feast on firewater, cigars, and conga drums. Today, I weep in public for the loss of decency, humanity, and justice for all that is sacred in our collective souls. Just deep breath. That was a hard one. That was a hard one. Out of that was born a way that I could support the movement without putting myself at risk. So I'm hosting a Facebook Live group called Witness Louisville. And it's a place where we witness the stories of Black and African American folks' lived experience of racism without questioning or rhetoric or responding. It's just witnessing, and then offer a poem or a quote or a writing as a gift. But the beginning of next year, that's the truth part based on the apartheid truth and reconciliation work. Next year, we are asking white folks to come and do the repair and talk about how they have benefited from racism and what are they willing to do to dismantle white supremacy and be part of being an ally. So we're looking forward to that. So if you're ever free on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock, we're there. I wanted to start by doing my signature poem, which is called Cuban by birth and Appalachian by the grace of God. I am a hillbilly from Cuba and did feel at home until I hit Kentucky. And all of my work is about identity and place. And this is one that I owe to Georgia Ella Lyon at the Carnegie Center. It came out of one of the workshops with her. I am from a place where roosters wake you up and chickens, they feed you breakfast. I'm from a place where pigs are slaughtered with grit and grace and every little bit is used for something. I am from a place where we feast on white rice, black beans, aguacates, and mojitos. And I'm from the bile of my mother's hatred of her wifely duties, and from kneeling on pebbles on the bathroom floor, wishing that I could fly, and sometimes I still do. I am from a place where cafe always accompanies cigars and visitors. And I'm from a place where we give voice to Punto Guajiro and worship the sound of La Rumba. I am from the song of Celia Cruz and the poetry of Martí. Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira, Guantanamera. I am from water gazing cleanses, bembes, and living altars. I am from a place where we throw shells the same as dominoes, and where the African tongues are fueled by rum and conga drums. I am from a place where women traded veils for machine guns. And I'm from a place where mango trees swing orchids on their hips. And I am from the mountains as well. I have dreamed on this mountain, so I was my mother's daughter. And you can't just take my dreams away without me fighting. I am from the sea, a warrior like Chango, fearless like Obatala, dressed in white and blue like my mother Yemaya. I am from a place where worn mountains touch the heavens and where hollers cradle tabaki, sorghum, and wild orchids. I am from a place where studying on it has nothing to do with reading and where coyotes serenade us while black barns play the fiddle. I am from a place where bless you little heart always accompanies criticism and where we share the bounty of our gardens and the copperheads on our wood piles. I have dreamed on this mountain, so I was my mother's daughter. I am from Appalachia all day long, but I am from Cuba at night. Thank you. Let me give you another piece. Because I thought I was retired, I can talk about some things that I had not shared before. I have always held space for other people. So it was the first time that I had to hold space for me. So I didn't have to worry about donors and advocates and image and all of that. I wrote about two very connected pieces in my life. One is called The Prince Was a Frog. And I left this wedding 3 days before my wedding. And I'm really, really glad I did. That was a pretty courageous young woman. So this is called The Prince. The Prince Was a Frog. His Roman profile severed the spaces he entered. His aloofness punctured conversations while curious eyes took notice of his silence. His chiseled and manicured body seduced under his tailored cloak, encasing the treasure we all desired. The heavy teenage girl, embarrassed by her want, dared to break his gaze. His neck twisted, his lips curved into a luscious and sassy grin. He slowly walked towards her, taking her books. The sidewalks home were paved with clouds. The cold, brisk air whistled his name, the snow parted, and the prince and I became my fairy tale. As the royal wedding neared, accusations and dominance emerged from his spewing tongue. His anger surfaced just below his embrace. The full range of his need became evident. Without regard, he claimed his dowry, and with the glee of a drunken sailor, he stared at the blood drops on the white sheets. In her numbness, she witnessed his demise. The crown on his head crumbled, his skeleton collapsed, his Italian cloth dropped onto the ceramic floor, his skin became damp and frothy. That day, the princess learned that happily ever after was a patriarchal delusion designed to appropriate the feminine, and she decided that her destiny was only hers to write. This is a memoir, so that was the first time I walked out of a wedding. I actually didn't get married until 4 years ago for the first time, after I was 60. So it took me a while to do that healing. This one is called Addiction. And I read this one on my book launch at the Omni, and one of my board chairs came up to me and said, you know, Marta, I can't believe that you didn't share this with us. And I said, would you trust an addict with $6.5 million budget? And she said, probably not. So that's why, you know, I have $1 billion budget now, so I hope nobody hears this part. Uh, so this is in the memoir, and it's also my story of addiction and recovery. You mended the burn marks on my back, the slaps across my face. You soothed my disjointed septum, and you rocked my colicky infant. You gave rhythm to my frozen hips after he took my virginity without permission. You greased my bones so that I could dance with abandon. You allowed my breath to return to my belly. You brought back giggles and laughter. You stood in for courage and gave me confidence. You melted the incessant microaggressions poured on my psyche daily. As time passed, you became a demanding and unforgiving captor. You abducted my freedom. Your jealousy became my prison. I awoke to shame running down my arm and drops of blood contaminating my medicine. Johnny Walker lost its luster. Rum no longer tasted like sugarcane, and Remy Martin cognac was no longer sophisticated. I often fell to my knees when riding horse, and the pure white snow turned to darkness. After 37 years of healing goodbyes, I'm still here, recovering from your brutal betrayal. Thank you. So how am I doing on time? Because I want to end with a fun one. Okay? I could do one more?
Yeah, let's do more.
Okay, let's do more. Okay. What I did was there's a lot of sweet pieces in this book because I've had a lot of sweetness, but one of the biggest sweetness that I have is my brother, and so I'll share one that I wrote for him. It's called Because of You. Because of you, I have done my best. Because of your caramel eyes were always filled with unending devotion. Because of your gentle spirit, I learned to love. Because your kindness inspired to call of the sacred to save my bitter heart. Because of you, my shoulders became steel lined with silken gloves. Because of you, my palms became as soft as crushed velvet. Because of you, I became a gifted orator, arguing your case and winning every trial. Because of your beautiful face and the smoothness of your shoulder-length hair, because you were a target to be bullied, I became fearless. Because of your gentle spirit, my body became a shield and my tongue a sword. Because your admiration calmed my insecurity, a new trust became my currency. Because of you, my rage dissolved into the holy water of your innocence. Because of you, I walked through hot coals, ate fire, and skillfully navigated the tightrope of trauma. Because of you, all that I am and all that I have become holds your light within my cells. Because of you, I walk towards what is good in the world. Because of you, fear transformed to courage. Because of you, my rage became inner peace. Because of your tears, mine became laughter. Because of you, my resentments became forgiveness. Because of you, my emptiness became contentment. And because of you, I live in anticipation. Because of you, I believe in miracles. And because of you, I know grace. Because of you, healing has molded our lives. Because of you, we have become sculptures of resilience and compassion. All because you needed me, but really, I needed you so much more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. Y'all can feel free to unmute for a second and clap if you want. Thank you so much for sharing those pieces. All right. Katerina's next. Katerina Stoykova is the author of several award-winning poetry books and is the senior editor of Accents Publishing. Katerina hosts Accents, a radio show for literature, arts, and culture on WRFL 88.1 FM. She acted in the lead roles in the narrative films Proud Citizen and Fort Maria, both directed by Thomas Sutherland. A bilingual author with many interests, Katerina focuses on living life to the fullest and being 100% true to herself. Welcome, Katerina.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Willow Literary Arts. Thank you, Marta, for these wonderful poems. I appreciate it. And thank you to all my friends for being here. And I really appreciate seeing you here. And thank you, Larry. You know, I have to single him out because he is the publisher of 2 of my books, How God Punishes and The Porcupine of Mind. And I'm experiencing a little bit of a deja vu because the first time I read it, InKY, Larry was in the audience. And here he is again, and he gets to hear some of my new work. And I want his approval, of course. That's the only man whose approval I want. Yes, maybe my son too. But, you know, listening to Marta and she being Cubalachian, I thought that maybe I should come up with something. And I think that I'm a Bulgarachian because I was born in Bulgaria. And for the grace of God, or by the aids of God, I live in Kentucky right now and in the United States. Later this month, it will be 25 years. So I'm going to read to you as many poems as I can from my new manuscript called The Irresistible Allure of Drowning Men. I'm going to start with the first poem. Once I bit into an apple and said, he and I will be finished by the time this apple rots. I kept it at my desk. The bite marks curled inwards, the white flesh scabbed over its softness. This lasted days upon days. Then I said to myself, I want to save this apple, so I locked it in the fridge. Already the apple was leaning into its wound, head first, without a face. In its cold home, furrows growing deeper. From time to time, I would pick up and assess. It's okay, I would say. It's okay, considering. The entire day I loved someone. When I returned home, I knew it wasn't you. Wasn't me either. Meanwhile, love had seeped into the cracks of the parquet floor, between the rubber goosebumps of the slippers. Meanwhile, love was left in a taxi cab or on a chair, or it retreated into the lifeline of a glove. We sat down for dinner. I reached and touched your face over 2 plates of peas and tomatoes. There were no words but the television, and the question, why am I here, ceased being existential, though the silence continued. I guess the whole book is relationship poems. So let's see if anyone has experienced something like that of what I'm talking about now. Show me two people who never argue, and I will show you two people who fear telling each other the truth. Unbearable loneliness pushed off to the periphery. Now I see you. Now I don't know how to keep on convincing myself I want this. Why haven't I left? What's kept me here in a separate room? A bird stepping backward into a shell. The concessions latching around me like nesting dolls, just in case there is space, and in it I must keep alive. Dear one, it's not your fault that you were young. And it's not my fault I was hopeless and didn't have a dime. And it's not his fault he fell in love with us. And it's not your fault you called him dad. And it's not my fault I said I do. And it's not my fault I ate his food. And it's not his fault he was good to us. And it's not your fault you went to school. And it's not my fault I let you two grow into a father and son. And it's not his fault for being the only one. And it's not my fault for saying I love you with a closed heart for 15 years. And it's not his fault for never hearing. And it's not your fault for turning into a fine young man because of him. And it's not my fault for not letting myself know how I feel. And it's not his fault for being the good guy. And it's not your fault for growing up and leaving me and him without us. And it's not my fault for feeling like I've lost my life. And it's not his fault he's happy with the way things are. Honey, this is the scary truth. The ring on your finger does not protect you from your heart, despite the way at times your heart protects you from the ring on your finger. More often though, it is what it is. You are who you are, and you're sorry, but try as you might, you cannot feel what you promised before the immigration judge. By now, you don't know how to wake up, even as you feel the force of your life drip like the sap of a sliced grapevine, even as you hear the vague noise of the passage of your time having a different day, some other place, yet you keep on sitting here staring at that link in your chain. The party continues. A man and a woman in a bedroom. The woman laying in bed, the man sitting by her, rubbing her ankles and feet. Nobody speaks. She thinks about her trip. He thinks about his work. The spouses are together in the same room, which is rare. His gaze wanders. He reads out loud titles of self-help books scattered across the floor. Healing your aloneness. Inner bonding. Do I have to give up me to be loved by you? She has shut her eyes. In a minute, he will kiss her goodnight and leave for another room. He had given her a cute coupon for massage of 2 body parts, and tonight both were redeemed. I'll continue with a found poem. Has it happened to you that you have a conversation with someone and then say just wait a minute, and you write it down? So it's wonderful when it happens, and it doesn't happen all that often. It happened a few years back when I had a conversation with a 4-year-old. So here is the poem. It's called Short Tale of Love. Conversation with Denitsa, a 4-year-old. Katya, I'm Katya. Katya, do you have a boyfriend? Denitsa, yes. Katya, who? Denitsa, Georgy Iliev. Katya, is he cute? Denitsa, yes. Katya, what's so cute about him? Denitsa, we hunt bugs together. Katya, and what do you do with these bugs? Denitsa, we kill them. Katya, you kill them? Why? Denitsa, so that we can take them. Then we play with them. Then we set them free. Then we look for others. So what do you think? You know, out of the mouths of babes, right? Dear Little Red Riding Hood, keep away if you can. Before approaching his bed, ask more questions. Try to peek under the nightcap. Those big eyes aren't what they seem, nor the smile or the muscled arms. You will be swallowed whole. He will enjoy consuming you, and, truth be told, most days there will be nothing else you would rather be but a bump beneath his heart. Nonetheless, my dear, run until the proverbial woods fade afar, until you no longer yearn to disappear, no longer crave to save his life by donating yours like an organ. But what else is new? His body wants to live, and you want to give, to feel alive. I assure you, everybody finds love by the end of the manuscript. Just kidding. It's a great day to burn, the man said. He meant, it's nice outside, not too much wind, the dew has lifted, and you can light a match to your old poems ripped from journals because you don't want anyone to read them in case you decide to die and actually go through with it. The last bit I added in my head, but he suspected as much. This is why he locked his gun and hid the key. The bullets lived in a ceramic bowl in the bedroom. One might confuse them with hard candy. The revolver used to lay by his head. He said he needed it to feel safe since he worked with inmates, but I think he liked knowing that at any moment he can kill someone. I made up that last part. He wants to keep me alive. I am the one slipping in and out of the sweet urge to die. Yes, sweet, I meant that. Wanna come burn with me? The man asked his little dog, and she followed him to the backyard. Well, I think the next one is a prose poem. There he is, standing by the flower shop, holding a single red rose. He's scared, convinced she's out of his league, so he readies his heart on the chopping block and covers it with hope. So, this is love. She gets off the bus, sees his stance of last straw resembling dignity. He wants her. She wants to be wanted that much. A life and death kind of pull. More death, less and less life. They've been there before. They've bled together. They've melted with plans she would snap in and out of believing. Days of happiness vacuuming in years of their lives. He waits with his rose. She gets off the bus. He greets her and they walk together to his place to spend the night. I don't need to tell you, all this ends bad. And starts and ends and starts and ends until they shun each other on the promenade. And the last poem that I'll read to you is the last poem of the manuscript. Actually, I took you through a walk to my new manuscript. And I'm so excited to read these new poems for you. Thank you for listening. And in the morning, we saw a moth, M-O-T-H. I cannot say the T-H. Let me start from the beginning. And in the morning, we saw a moth fused head first to the shallow tin of a burnt out tea light. His wings glazed with wax, antenna set into the wick, and every pair of his legs pressed into a prayer. Done, gone out with the light. What a way to propagate your cautionary tale, friend. What a way to stay a monument to love. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate you, and I can't wait to hear John. I have heard poems from his book. I hope he reads from his book. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina. Thank you for sharing new work with us. I love it. Thank you. All right, so our last reader is John James. John James is the author of The Milk Hours, selected by Henry Cole as the winner of the Max Ritvo Poetry Prize. His poems appear in Boston Review, Kenyon Review, Gulf Coast, PEN America, Best American Poetry, and elsewhere. An image text chapbook, Winter Glossolalia, is forthcoming next year from the Black Spring Publishing Group. He splits his time between Kentucky and California, where he's pursuing a PhD in English at UC Berkeley. And now for John. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Amy, for organizing. Thank you to Marta, who I think had to step out already, and thank you so much, Katerina, for those absolutely devastating poems. I will admit that I'm not always, as many poetry readings as I attend, I am not always the best listener. I kind of catch usually the first couple of poems somebody reads, and somewhere along the line I tend to tune out a little bit, and I'm still listening, but I take in more the cadence of the person's voice. And you had my attention that whole time. That was just, those new poems are amazing, and I'm really looking forward to that book. Which is, I guess, my way of saying that's a hard act to follow. And also, I suppose I'll apologize to the audience because I'm not necessarily going to lighten the mood either. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of my poems. But, sometimes we write from a place of grief or need or want. And so, I don't know. That's where the poems begin. And that's how they make it to the page. And that's how they make it onto Zoom and into your ears. So anyways, I'll begin with the title poem of my book. And I'll read a few poems from the book, and then I'll read a few new poems, and then maybe circle back to just one piece from the book. So we'll give you kind of a tour, both of a short tour of the book and a tour of some new work. So this is The Milk Hours. We lived overlooking the walls, overlooking the cemetery. The cemetery is where my father remains. We walked in the garden for what seemed like an hour, but in reality must have been days. Cattail, heartseed, these words mean nothing to me. The room opens up into white and more white, sun outside between steeples. I remember now the milk hours, leaning over my daughter's crib, dropping her 10, 12 pounds into the limp arms of her mother. The suckling sound as I crashed into sleep. My daughter, my father, his son, the wet grass dew speckled above him. His face grows vague and then vaguer. From our porch, I watch snow fall on bare furs. Why does it matter now? What gun? What type? Blue smoke rises. The chopped copses glisten. Snow melt smooths the stone cuts of his name. I'm now going to read the oldest poem in the book. Which is about, my grandfather owned a farm in central Kentucky and he grew tobacco, which is what the cover of the book is, a flowering tobacco plant. Mostly it's there because of this poem, so I think it's worth reading. Kentucky, September. My grandfather stood outside smoking, watching the migrant workers bend over the bare furrow. I was in the cross barn, stripping leaves from green stalks, knowing God was cruel, that he must be. Even on a map, South America looks like a sick heart. I hung the leaves from tiered poles and let them dry in the heat. Once, we found a she-goat dead, her belly split and blood trailing over an arched rock. Something about her innards spread across the ground made me think of nakedness. My grandfather took the carcass in his arms and carried it to the driveway, where I said a short prayer. Stripping finished for the night, I sat next to my grandfather on a wooden bench behind the barn, hands beneath my legs, our backs cocked against a bale of hay. Bats erupted from the silo like buckshot. Then I realized this wasn't my grandfather, and these weren't my hands. All of this was a pasture resembling heaven. Heaven was a meadow in time. The moon rose over the empty fields, wedging shadows together in the dirt. This next poem is titled Spaghetti Western, and it is about, many of you probably know, the little drive-in movie theater in Georgetown, Indiana. So that's where it takes place anyways. I don't know if that's what it's about, but I never know what any of the poems are really about. Spaghetti Western. In Georgetown, Indiana, the steel projector reels. The desert stretches blankly before us, a red plain constellated with rows of dry mesquite. Stone wall, still screen, a single emptiness, I suppose, throwing gray light over the tops of parked cars. John Wayne surveying the valley in a pair of seared chaps. Behind us, low hills roll off. The highway, congested, winds between them, an inflamed artery subjected to cloud cover. Nothing avoids the firm gaze of commerce, not the taut sky, the lake water rippling beneath it, not the fields of wild fennel, their tiny yellow flowers scattering spore dust, sycamores doing the same. Tree sex, we say, then nothing. Cowboys rehearsing their pose. And my computer, I'm realizing, is on very low battery, so I'm going to move myself real quick so I don't cut out on you. Apologies. I've been Zooming. I'm teaching via Zoom from Louisville, but in California. So I've just been constantly on my computer, and it just can't handle doesn't have enough juice. Can't handle it. Okay. This next poem is titled At Assateague. Assateague is an island off the coast of Maryland in the Chesapeake Bay, where I was supposed to make a vacation trip at one point that never quite took place. But I imagined it, and a poem came out of it anyways. So this is At Assateague. The sun is a thin line of red broadening over the bay. It slices the horizon, strikes light into a darkness poised to disclose some secret the night couldn't shake out of it. Trout smokes over hot coals. Wild ponies in the distance charge along the strand, kick sand up behind them, an inelegant cloud that smears the dawn's gouache. It's unbearable, this scene, its sickening romance. Still, I want to hold it, to freeze its sudden architecture in the flotsam of the beach, to suck the ichor from its rib. It wouldn't sustain me, I know. The gulls turning their circles would grow dull. I'd berate the sand flea's itch. The gravitation of the tide's pull would choke me with ennui. Pear blossoms soon give way to pears. I'll never stop eating them. I'll maybe read two more kind of short poems from the book and then move into some new work, which is not, I'm realizing maybe so different from these poems. These last couple of ones, though, were some of the later poems I wrote for this book. So maybe one project is just sort of bleeding into the other one. This next piece is, I lived in Washington, D.C. for 3 years. And so there are a couple of poems in here, that last one included, that are either about DC or just that sort of the East Coast corridor between DC and Philadelphia. So this is Delaware I-95, which I literally wrote on a bus going from DC to Philly while my daughter was asleep in my lap. So Delaware I-95. Cattails at lakeside constitute ecologies. Telephone wires dissect the sky, negate the coast's rusted corridor. Purple lupin erupts in the median. The sleeping child on my leg dozes, becomes aware, loses consciousness again, her cheeks flanked by marsh light, summer's hum, the blue idola of bug guts spattering the windshield and the cold mechanic valence of the lamps along the road, the round oaks rapidly scuttering into the sagged night, where thoughts low and turbid overflow, winds in. And this piece is called Catalog, beginning with a line by Plato. To the feasts of the good go unbidden. Children's hands in snow, houseboats on the lake, a red and yellow bicycle, the scent of black cedar severed in its prime. When my father died, the nickel wire of my throat collapsed, snapped, twisted in air, hung itself limply from the column of my neck. It's okay to play leapfrog in the yard. In the window sits a lampshade exhausted by light. A man and woman riding home in the dark warm the leather of their seats. A clown-faced wren pecks bark from a pine, jams the acorns in a hole. My mother slices plums on the counter, removes the insides from their skin, steeps lilac in a pot. The bubblegum medicine she hauls from the drawer. I take it from a spoon. All right, so I'm gonna read two new poems. One new poem and then part of a longer poem. I won't inflict a full long poem on you. And I've been, this poem in particular, I guess is the most recent poem that feels finished enough to read to somebody. I wrote it, I guess last month. It's called Everything Must Happen, But to Whom It Doesn't Matter. And it's sort of my version of a pandemic poem, which is not to say that it addresses the pandemic specifically so much as it was writing from a place of and thinking about the slow temporality we experience, right? The way time slows down for us. Again, can also kind of quicken actually at the same time in really weird ways. So I was trying to think about like the consciousness or our conscious experience of time in the pandemic. And that's what this poem for me is about. Although, like I said, I never know what the poems are actually about. Everything must happen, but to whom it doesn't matter. Trout break the surface of the lake. Water eats the cliff slip. Hog fat roaring in a stolid pan warmed by guttering flame. Smoke floats. The blue limbs of tattered conifers frame a sky barred with ribbons of light. Needles on the forest floor tenebrous as leopard spots strung through a thicket of leaves. One boat's slow slur chops another's foamy wake. If the road ends, it ends in the lucid motion of dragonflies cutting the air. Cattails heavy in a layered bed of shale. Already I'm staring at my feet, counting out the time it takes the flies to find the center of the meat. Mycelium to gather on the substrate of a log. There never was a road. In the pan, the sulfur shelf's bright orange darkens to cinnamon glaze, its tossed caps strewn along the oak's base, big with morning rain. A stone smell drifts off the water. I hear a motor hum. The atmosphere is brimming with the putrid scent of life. Its petrichor, its iron, its camphor, and its loam. And this next piece, the excerpt from the longer poem, I began writing, and I still might be finishing the last bit of it, hence also why I'm not reading the full thing. It's called The Delusion of Being Absolute, which is a line from an essay by Theodore Adorno. But I wrote it during the electricity shutdown in California last year. I don't know if people remember this from the news. I wanted to read it tonight because of the horrible fires that are taking place across the West Coast, which even though I'm in Kentucky right now, I'm especially aware of it because my students are, looking out their windows and all they see is just a big orange haze. And unfortunately, it's not the metaphorical orange haze that's been plaguing us for the past, nearly 4 years now. Anyways, the fires were not so bad last year because PG&E, the electric company out there, shut down electricity to nearly 1 million people. We were out of electricity for several days in much of the Bay Area. So I started writing this poem then because the campus was shut down. There just wasn't even a whole lot else to do. Oh yeah, I won't say more about it than that. The delusion of being absolute. Slicing the bellies of cold cod, I watched tankers plow into the bay's mouth, the bridge's taut cables glinting in shorelight, the thrust of my locution anchored in addiction to place. I scrawled clipped missives, tucked the envelopes in a sack damp with the accretion of fog. I pined for the web's noetic buzz. In the pit I lit a fire, waited while the flames stripped the dry twigs. Sound bled from the sky's fissured maw. I thought of glaciers calving themselves, noise reverberating over a plain of packed snow. Witness was I to its deletion, its mass relaxing like a cube of ice, softening in a tumbler's throat. In those hours, time distended, flies gathered, then dispersed, the water over mottled rocks repeatedly sloshing, each iteration of its movement modeling an attempt to set the record straight. The weather reports will not absolve us. Hills let the wind in. For a moment, the ocean's surface seemed a sheet of slate, the water itself technically expanding, worsening drought, potentiating flame. To me, there was only stasis, a locked to and fro, by which the variability of the water's shape heaved a single pulse. The day spread. Tall elk chewed the stems peppering the cliff's ridge. Sun struck, redness smeared the skin of my neck. I seared the fish flesh, listened to the pop of oil as it singed a thyme sprig. Evening cauterized the grasses, simulated fire with its crude light. My lips moved, and the drone of phonemes drowned the day's heat, a signage no less palatable for its investment in monotony. Once, in the supermarket, I combed the stocked shelves, searching the aisles for evidence of vacancy. I found among the varied cans of meat a cornucopia of choice, an emblem of abundance that formed its own dearth. Out of boredom, I listed the ingredients aloud. Their empty polysyllables rattled in my teeth. So that's the first section of that poem, and so far there are four. Well, one's very short. So I'll just close by reading a short poem from my book, ostensibly about climate change, but really about other things as well. More importantly, maybe about other things. It's called Erosion. I played with the sunlight splayed between grains, halos of ash around her sleeping eyes, skeleton stalks moving briefly in the yard. She told me about the bees, how in winter they expel the crumpled bodies of their dead, dropping shells one by one onto the dirt. Hive center, the queen warms herself on honey. I think of the artist who scooped them in her palm, sealed them in bags, left them in the window. Wheat shocks, summer dark, an hour lying in the grass. Emptiness itself cuts along the bank. I wanted to make this vivid, so vivid, to say a passerine flits in the wind. Pistil, stamen, pollen floods my nose, powdering tent walls, the acne scars honeycombing her face. Seas rush, rivers stop, seepage from a well. Everyone believes in one rapture or another. It is summer. I am thirsty. My canteen is empty. There is not enough water. There was never enough water. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of our readers. Wow, devastating imagism, almost. That's my little phrase for tonight. Now we're gonna do a little Q&A. So if anyone has a question, you can throw it in the chat and I'll read it, or you can unmute yourself and announce that you have a question, and I will gladly let you ask. And while you're stewing on what you might want to ask, I do want to ask one question of John. So you brought up the about quality of poetry a couple times.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, I love hearing poets talk about aboutness in poetry. So I would like to hear you expand on what you believe about aboutness, or if there is such a thing as aboutness. And if not, what's the organizing principle or rationale for your writing?
Two questions embedded in one.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll sort of frame my answer to this question by saying I hate the question, what are your poems about? In large part because I just don't have a good answer. I think poems are about many things. I think what poetry does, and the reason we come to it, is that it creates a kind of nuance, a kind of complexity that gathers many things together that we, when we read the poem, have to deal with and have to come to terms with simultaneously. And so a poem is never about a single thing. I think the notion of a poem being about a thing, or really good nuanced literature being about a thing, is, I mean, there's a way in which you can say what is a novel about and you're telling the plot, right? But a poem doesn't have a plot. I think to say a poem is about anything is more the product almost of the attempt to market a poetry book than anything, which I hate. I think sometimes the worst part about writing is the publishing, right? It's great to share the work, but the really great part, for me at least, and I think a lot of writers would say this, is the writing, is the exploration, is the act of grappling with language in order to get it where you want it to be. And so the second part of your question was, what was the second part of your question?
If not aboutness, then how do you conceive of a rational, like, not rationalize, but you know what I'm saying?
I was thinking something about form, and I was like, what was it? Yeah, I mean, for me, how do I rationalize it? A poem begins a couple of different ways. It might be a bit of sound I like. It might be an image. It might be a piece of language that caught my eye or my ear. And so I'll start with that. I'll start playing with that and see where I can build out of that. And so there is a kind of essential mystery to it as well. The poem leads me somewhere, and I know it's done when I strike, at least for me, a balance between content and form, right? Where everything just feels like it clicks into place, and there's a sort of productive tension in the poem. And once I strike that, then it's done for me, and it doesn't have to be about a thing. It might be about many things, and it is ostensibly about whatever image it conjures or whatever thing it names. But yeah, I don't think of poems necessarily as being about a thing. So that actually is why, I'm sitting here reading and saying, oh yeah, a poem. Who knows what a poem is about? That's why I think poems aren't about things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love that simultaneity, experiential aspect that you sort of brought up. We have a question from Angela. For both of you, how are you both doing with your writing during a time when the world is in turmoil? I think that's a very interesting process question, since we're getting into like, how do we conceive of our writing, but also like what seeds do we see in turmoil? Do either of you want to tackle how you're doing with your writing right now?
Katerina, do you want to talk first, just since I already had a chance to speak a little bit?
Yeah, sure, but I just have to say something about the aboutness, and that is my Stutinki. And my Stutinki says that, I guess in my experience, in my practice, is I ask myself, what do I want to say with this poem? And I don't really ask myself what the poem is about. But whenever I put together a manuscript, I want to know what it's about. at least to answer this question for myself. How am I doing with my writing? Well, I'm pleased with my productivity. I feel that I'm more focused than many other times in my life, and that is because I have less distractions and I do not travel. Normally, I would be several months in Bulgaria out of the year, and I would go on trips, and trips cost dearly with time and focus. Some people can write when they travel. I can't. I cannot write before travel, during travel, after travel. So that really does a number on my writing. So I guess this year has been good for completing projects. I wouldn't have this stack of poems. Not that I went ahead and wrote all of them this year, but I was able to live with them and make something with this year. So there have been good things that have happened to my writing this year.
Yeah, so I think I've got a lot more than the pandemic sort of feeding into this, but I have, I'm a little, this sounds bad to say after like giving a poetry reading, but I'm a little bored with poetry right now. And I don't mean poetry as a form or listening to other people's poems, but I'm frustrated with everything I write. Just to me, I have this kind of what for question in the back of my mind. Like, why did I write this? Why do I care? It's not what is this poem about, but what does it mean, or why am I writing it? And I think that comes from having just published a book and being on the tail end, not just of having published it, but having traveled a lot, and which also cost me dearly. I understand that really well, Katerina. But having traveled a lot also to promote it, which kind of came to a really like jerking, but for me, a grateful halt, in March when everything started shutting down. I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to like get on another plane and go anywhere for a while. Now it'd be nice to get on a plane maybe and go somewhere. Although I've made more trips recently around Kentucky. So that's been great too. Anyways, but also though, I mean, I'm a PhD student. I'm reading for my qualifying exams. So I just have, and I'm teaching. I have a lot of other things that are kind of weighing on my mind that are sort of zapping that creativity out of me. And so I'm trying to not completely reinvent myself, but I'm trying to break ground on a new project while also distancing this project from the poems that came before. I don't want to write the same book twice. And yeah, I just right now, I mean, I read a couple of new poems and I like them. I like these ones, but particularly the first new poem I read didn't feel very new to me, or the aesthetic didn't seem new. It felt like it could easily have been part of the last book. And, I don't know, I'm trying to break away from that a little bit. So I think it had less to do with the pandemic, right? But yeah, I'm bored or frustrated or feeling a little bit stunted in my writing.
I'm sure there's more to say about the balance between like certain aspects of work and writing as work and, life as work and things like that. I was wondering how other people are continuing to write amidst turmoil as well, emotionally zapping your creative energy. There's so much drawing our attention in so many different directions. And Amy's bringing that up in this question about grief, I think. Grief and intense emotional commitment or attachment. How is that informing your writing, either right now or the projects that you read from or have worked with in the past? How does grief or that intensive emotional outpouring affect your writing? She's asking, do you let grief carry it, or do you use form to help you structure the emotions in the poetry? Any of that, either of you?
For me, it was the kind of like inevitable thing that forced itself into being. I didn't set out to write about grief, but I think we all kind of have our, what my teacher Lucy Brock-Broido used to call our terrible crystals, right? But these things that, they're these sort of like latent obsessions that we don't even necessarily think about consciously, but when we sit down to write, they're the things that come out. And writing about, my father's death was something that just inevitably, when I sat down to write, even, in my late teens, early 20s, was the thing that I was writing about, because it was the thing that I didn't talk about or actively think about. What about you, Katerina?
Well, I think that grief is pay me now or pay me later. At some point, it will show up and it will not be ignored. So you can go actively after it, or you can wait for it to find you, but eventually you're going to have to write about it. And what happened with me in, let's say, with this project about domestic violence, it was on my journey as a writer, and I had to either completely stop writing or go through with it and write this book. And I ended up going through and writing this book that right now I'm unable to read from readings, at readings. So basically about, I don't know about form, I don't know about, what was the other part of the question? The grief carrying you. But what I found out is that if you're writing about something that is absolutely with intense emotions, it is best to work with a skilled counselor to help you through the writing or through the accessing in a productive way, so that the work and working with the grief doesn't injure you in a way that's unproductive. I'll say that. I'll use that word again.
That's important that you mentioned that. I think that you can think about writing as writing with emotion, writing through emotion, but we also need support in order to do that. Writing isn't just that cathartic processing, but it is also that.
Well, there is a reason that for certain things we wait till we're 40, 50, 60 years old before we're ready to start. We need to be ready and we need to be supported in order to tell certain, and we need the perspective in order to tell certain portions of our stories.
I think Marta was speaking to that a little bit. I wish maybe Amy can send her this question and we can get an answer about that too. And I want to be conscious of time, but also there was a question about fish and fishing and imagery in John's poems. Do you want to say anything about fish?
Yeah, I mean, I don't consciously set out to write fishing poems or poems about fishing, but I had an uncle who ended up dying when I was about 13, but who used to take me on little fishing trips pretty often. And so it was a kind of like formative experience and it was probably in a way my first like truly meditative experience, where you sit and you think and you have to have a lot of patience. You don't do a whole lot else. And then I guess it's sort of, it works itself into metaphors from there for some reason. Fishing can sometimes be, especially the word line, like plays on the word line, can become, I like poems that are sort of self-referential, that are thinking about the process of writing a poem. I've got a lot of poems that are sort of like ars poeticas in that way. That's a poem about writing, a poem about writing a poem. And so, there's there's a line, I didn't read this one tonight, but it says something like, not this line, but the one I'm casting out, right? It's, sort of playing on the consciousness of the poetic line versus the fishing line. But otherwise, really, I mean, this summer, because of the pandemic, I also have spent more time outside at, lakes in Kentucky, and actually happened to just go fishing this weekend. But I don't normally do it that often. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to notice. And it might have to do more with the specific poems I read tonight, but there are a handful of them for sure.
Nice. It certainly sounds nice and meditative right about now. Amy, do we want to close out? Or yeah, okay. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our readers, and thank you for your thoughts on writing too. It's been really lovely to hear you talk. Let's thank everyone, and looking forward to our October InKY, which will feature Tony Brewer and Ellen Burkett Morris. Go ahead and look at localliteratearts.org for more info on programs and things. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.